Chapter 25 of the Alps, the Danube, and the Near East. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Read by Betty B. Motoring through the land of Homer. Riding over Greece, one sees how slowly the old gives way to the new. Here and there on the large estates, I have seen American tractors and other farm machinery, and in the drained Lake Kopai, district tobacco and cotton are now grown by scientific methods. In the smaller valleys, however, and almost everywhere in Greece, the soil is tilled as it was in the days of Homer. The same sort of plow is used as those carved on the temple frescoes, and the grain is still cut with a sickle and bound by hand. Threshing is done with flails and by driving horses and oxen over the grain. The women and children winnow it by throwing it into the air. Like many other countries of Eastern Europe, Greece is cutting up her large estates in order to provide lands for the people, but these small farms are not so efficiently cultivated, and the harvest is small. I find that this clinging to the old fashions lends a special enjoyment to journeys along the dusty highways of Greece. When I see the people at work with their crude plows and their ancient flails, I think to myself that here are scenes exactly like those Hesiod had before him when he wrote his poems of the soil. During my drive by motor from Athens to Delphi, every foot of the way reminded me of the Hellas of the past and of the names and deeds of the great ones that have come down to our day. I got some gasoline at Amphissa, where Philip II of Macedon stopped in his conquest of Greece, and we changed a tire in ancient Thebes, the home of Pindar, the poet. I asked at Thebes about Pindar, but the modern Greeks could not show me the site of his birthplace, and I looked in vain for any remains of the Sphinx or the Theban Republic that vied with Sparta and Athens for supremacy in ancient Hellas. The Thebes of today has only a few thousand people. Under the great trees along the main street were piles of vegetables, baskets of grain, and other farm produce. The people work out in the street, and I saw cobblers pegging shoes in the shade. The country surrounding Thebes has excellent soil and is a fair sample of what one finds in the plains and the valleys. I had always imagined that Greece was all mountains, with farms perhaps in the wedge-shaped crevices where the hills came together. This and other trips have given me a different idea. There are many broad flat valleys with here and there plains of considerable size. About 1/5 of Greece is under cultivation, and there are more than 1,000,000 acres covered with olive groves and vineyards. More land is devoted to wheat raising than to any other one crop, while one of the most valuable is tobacco, much of which goes into American cigarettes. Just now many of the tobacco fields are in the blossom. There are great white seed bowls on the tall stalks, and the people are picking off the fine leaves and bringing them up to dry. The chief tree one sees in motoring over the country is the olive. The trees live a long time, and the Greeks say, "If you would plant for yourself only, set out grapevines. If you would plant for your children, choose the fig tree. But if you would plant for your great-grandchildren, the olive is the thing to do." There are 33 different varieties of olive trees, and of these, 30 grow well in Greece. In some seasons, the oil output is 12 million gallons, and the exports are sometimes worth $3 million a year. The crop varies according to the soil and the season, and the man who gets 2 crops out of 5 does well. I was once here during the harvest. It lasts for weeks, and the women and children do much of the work. On the island of Crete, the olive harvest is the gayest time of the year, for the girls then have more freedom and love-making thrives. Some of the olives are gathered green for pickling, but those used for oil are generally shaken or beaten from the branches, falling upon cloths laid under the trees. The workers are often paid in kind, about 2/7 of the oil going to them. I have seen many groves of these low, squatty trees. They look ragged and gnarly, each having a rough, silver trunk with a huge, wide-branching brush on the top. The trees are carefully trimmed, and the ground around them is cultivated with the plow and the hoe. Some of the groves are irrigated. The leaves are pale green, and like all of the vegetation of this limestone land, are almost always covered with dust. The dust is characteristic of Greece. The same sort of limestone rock as that from which the ancient statues were made crops out here and there all over the country. The roads are surfaced with this rock, which the traffic grinds up into a dust as fine as flour, and of almost the same color. The trees become covered with it, and the grass and flowers are sprinkled with frosted silver. One's face soon looks like a miller's. Every hotel keeps a bootblack at the door to wipe off the shoes of new arrivals. The whole country has a dusty look, and every automobile raises a cloud that trails behind it like the smoke of a locomotive. Between May and September no rain falls, but in spring and fall the land blooms with flowers and remains green all winter. The roads of Greece are comparatively good, but they are so white and glaring in the bright sunlight that in motoring I always keep on my goggles, and so dusty that I wear the long linen duster common in our country when automobiles first came into use. Many of the highways show good engineering. They climb the mountains, zigzagging this way and that in great loops, and afford fine views of the green olive groves and white villages in the valleys below. Some of them were made for military purposes and were trod by the armies of Alexander the Great and Philip of Macedon. Most of the plowing is done by oxen, and the crops are usually carried from the fields on the backs of farm animals. As I rode across the basin of Lake Kopai, I was stopped often by donkeys and mules laden with corn. Each had 6 corn shocks fastened to its sides by ropes over the back and around the belly, and as they walked they resembled a whole cornfield going off upon legs. In Greece, horses, donkeys, and mules have the place taken by women in Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia. The women here sometimes ride on the loads and sometimes walk behind, driving the animals before them. There are no geese such as I noted in the lands of the Danube, but instead flocks of hundreds of little black goats scamper over the hillsides. I saw many of the homes of the farmers who live in villages strung along the roadside and go out into the fields to work. During the summer, many of them sleep out of doors. Their houses are small and mean in comparison with the homes of the peasants of Germany or France, but under the bright summer skies they do not look so squalid as they would elsewhere. They are often wretched huts of stone or sun-dried brick, with the windows unglazed and no chimneys. The doors are of stone, and frequently an open fire is used for cooking. The houses have little furniture and no modern conveniences, and the people make no attempt to brighten them with flowers or anything green. Clothes are usually washed at the streams, although in Thebes there are municipal washtubs of concrete fed by cold water. The women stand out in the street as they launder their clothes. In the better cultivated parts of the country, where there are often 2-story houses, the people sometimes live in the 2nd story, reached by a stairway from the outside, and use the ground floor as a stable. Many of the peasants spin and weave all the wool, flax, and cotton needed for their clothing. Although the looms are very primitive, the woolen and silk cloths made on them are often beautiful. In some parts of Greece the women use little hand cotton gins to separate the fibers from the seeds. They dye their cloth in bright colors and often spin it out in the courtyards or streets. Out in the country, goat's milk cheese and dried olives largely take the place of meat. The people eat bread and vegetables, and they drink wine. Olive oil is used instead of butter. Beef is practically unknown to the farmers. Easter is the great Thanksgiving Day, when roast lamb is substituted for our turkey. One of the delicious dishes often served is pilaf, a stew of rice and chicken, sometimes with raisins mixed in. The country is as famous for its honey as in ancient times, when that of Hymettus was prized throughout the classical world. All Greek honey has a fine flavor, supposed to come from the thyme, which grows everywhere in this country. An American woman I have met here, who has made a fortune in beekeeping in the United States, tells me there is no land upon earth that has so many honey flowers as Greece. She thinks this country might supply all Europe with honey if its apiaries were managed according to modern methods. As it is now, the hives are mere baskets plastered with mud, and the bees are smoked out when the honey is taken. Many are killed, and the comb is so crudely removed that most of the honey must be strained for the market. Greece is a land of fine fruits. It has oranges, lemons, and figs, and peaches as rosy as the Albertas of Georgia. The melons would make a darky's mouth water, and the white grapes are as large and delicious as those of Malaga. The chief money crop, however, is a grape the size of a marrow-fat pea. It is so small that it is known as a currant. Indeed, the word currant comes from Corinth. At the time of Christ, the city was the main shipping point for these little grapes, which thus got the name of Corinth grapes or currant grapes. Today, the chief shipments are from Patras, a little port farther west. It is hard to estimate the richness of that part of Greece. The reddish-brown soil shines like velvet under the rays of the sun. I rode for miles through vineyards of low vines which are cut back from year to year. In the winter they are nothing but stumps as thick as my leg and as high as my knee. They put out new sprouts every spring, and in summer are one bed of green. In good seasons the yield is almost 200 million tons. Of late it has been so great that the exporters have restricted production to keep up prices. Within the last year more than 6,000 acres of vines were uprooted for this reason. The currant grape is seedless and as sweet as sugar. It is sold as a raisin, being used all over the world for cakes and puddings. In some years we take as much as 20 million pounds. The cultivation is carried on in 60,000 vineyards by peasant proprietors who do all the work by hand. In January, the roots of the vines are uncovered so that they can get air. In March, when the green shoots are about a foot long and the buds begin to appear on the stems, the soil is again leveled. After the blossoms have fallen, the bark is so cut that the sap does not run down the stem but goes into the fruit, increasing its size and quality. The grapes are gathered about the end of July, carried to the drying grounds, and spread out in the sun. After that they are picked from the stems, cleaned and sorted, and shipped to the markets. The business is profitable, good grape land often selling for $500 an acre. I wish I could lift up a half-dozen Greek farmers by the napes of their necks and drop them down into the heart of St. Louis or Boston. In their Sunday dress one could hardly tell, except for their beards, whether they were women or men. They seem to be clad for the stage rather than for the field, and they might pose as ballet dancers. They wear knee breeches and leggings, above which are several short white skirts that stand out from the body like those of the lady bareback rider in the circus. A vest, richly embroidered, reaches to the waist, and a fez tops the outfit. The shoes are of red leather turned up at the toes like old-fashioned skates, and have fat red woolen tassels at the tips. The costumes of the Greek country women vary according to the locality. A common field dress is of linen homespun falling from the neck almost to the feet. Over this is worn a sleeveless sack of white wool which reaches to the thighs. The headgear is a knit or felt cap of bright red or perhaps a colored handkerchief. The farm girls are uniformly straight, due, it may be, to the heavy burdens which they carry on their heads. They are intelligent, industrious, and thrifty, and they add to the earnings of the farm by their home industries. Every girl is expected to spin, weave, and embroider their own wedding gown, which has a linen skirt so loaded with silk that it may weigh a couple of pounds. In some parts of Greece, the farmer's daughter, when she is married, is supposed to bring a trousseau of at least 3 costumes. One is for everyday wear, one for Sundays, and the other for festivals. At the wedding, these and the rest of her dowry are borne to the church on the back of a mule. As the married couple leave the church, their friends throw candies at them. At the house of the groom, the man enters first and shuts the door. The bride then smears the closed door with honey and throws a ripe pomegranate at it. If the pomegranate breaks and the seeds stick in the honey, it is a sign that her married life will be happy. As the pomegranate strikes the door, the husband opens it and offers his bride bread and salt. She dips the bread into the salt and eats it, and then touches some water and oil. After this, the husband lifts her inside the house and puts her in a corner with her back against the wall. She stays there without speaking while the man and his friends are eating the wedding feast, and it is not until the last guest leaves that she may make herself at home. This is probably the one time of her life when every Xantippe is silent. End of chapter 25.